The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Knights Ferry, California, causing Sadie Gibson to drop to the ground instinctively, her heart pounding against her rib cage. Around her, people scattered for safety, voices rising in panic, voices she could see but not hear, at least not in the way others did. In the chaos, she caught sight of a man in a worn leather vest and dusty boots standing his ground, revolver drawn as he faced down the shooter at the opposite end of the street. Summer of 1875 had brought nothing but trouble to Knights Ferry since the new mining company moved in, and today was no exception. Sadie pressed herself against the rough wood of the general store's outer wall, wishing not for the first time that she could call out a warning as the shooter took aim at the brave stranger. Sadie's fingers moved frantically, signing to no one in particular. "Behind you, second-floor window." But of course, no one understood. No one ever did. The stranger, the cowboy, seemed to sense something anyway. He dove behind a water trough just as another shot splintered the wood where he'd been standing. His eyes met hers across the distance, something unspoken passing between them before he returned fire. When the shooting finally stopped, Sadie remained frozen in place while others emerged from their hiding spots. The cowboy holstered his weapon and walked toward her, his gait steady despite the close call. As he approached, Sadie noticed his eyes deep blue like the mountain lakes her father had once taken her to see, and the concerned furrow of his brow. "You all right, miss?" he asked, extending a hand to help her up. Sadie took his hand but couldn't answer. Her fingers moved to explain, but she stopped herself. Instead, she nodded and tried to smile. "Name's Dawson Quinn," he said, tipping his hat. "Just passing through, but seems I've found trouble again." He studied her face, waiting for a response that wouldn't come. "And you are?" Sadie hesitated, then gestured to her throat and shook her head. She pointed to her ears, then made a slicing motion with her hand. "You can't speak?" Dawson asked, his voice softening. When she nodded, he continued, "Well, that don't make your company any less worth having. Is there somewhere safe I can escort you? That shooter might have friends." A tap on Dawson's shoulder interrupted them. Sheriff Thornton, a man Sadie had known since arriving in Knights Ferry 3 years ago, approached with his badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Quinn, isn't it?" the sheriff asked, eyeing the cowboy with suspicion. "I remember you from that business in Sacramento last year." He turned to Sadie with a gentler expression. "Miss Gibson, you all right? Want me to walk you back to your place?" Sadie shook her head and pointed to Dawson, then to herself, and finally in the direction of her small home at the edge of town. "She wants me to walk her home," Dawson translated, surprising her. "If that's all right with you, Sheriff," Thornton frowned. "Miss Gibson can't speak, Quinn. How would you know what she's asking?" "My cousin lost his hearing in the war," Dawson replied with a shrug. "Had to learn to watch people's hands when they couldn't find their voice. I'm no expert, but I can usually figure things out." The sheriff looked between them, then reluctantly nodded. "Fine, but I'll be checking in later, Sadie, and Quinn, don't overstay your welcome in Knights Ferry. We've got enough trouble brewing." As they walked the dirt path toward her home, Sadie couldn't help stealing glances at Dawson. Few people had ever bothered to understand her, let alone a stranger passing through. She wondered what brought him to Knights Ferry and how long he would stay. Her modest home came into view, a small cabin with a vegetable garden beside it, and a workshop attached where she created the detailed leather goods that sustained her livelihood. She'd managed to build a quiet life here after losing her parents to fever 5 years ago. A life of solitude but independence. When they reached her door, Sadie turned and offered a genuine smile. Her hands moved slowly as she signed, "Thank you." To her surprise, Dawson's hands formed a clumsy but recognizable reply, "Welcome." Her eyes widened in surprise, and he laughed, a warm sound that she could feel in her chest somehow. "Don't look so shocked," he said, speaking while signing a few basic words. "Told you my cousin taught me some. Not much, mind you, but enough to say hello and goodbye at least." Sadie impulsively reached for his hand, squeezing it in gratitude before opening her door. She hesitated, then turned back to him. "Dinner?" She signed, then pointed inside. "To thank you." Dawson smiled, removing his hat. "I'd be honored, Miss Gibson, though I suspect the sheriff might not approve." Sadie shrugged and grinned mischievously, gesturing for him to enter. That evening changed everything. Over a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Dawson told her about his life as a horse trader, traveling between California, Nevada, and Oregon. He'd been headed to a ranch outside Knights Ferry when he witnessed the shooting. "Mining companies been trying to push folks out," he explained. "Hired guns intimidating shopkeepers, mysterious accidents at the smaller claims, stories the same all over these days." His expression darkened. "Wasn't always this way." Sadie found a slate and chalk she used for communicating with customers and wrote, "They want my land too. Good water source." Dawson frowned. "You here alone? Family nearby?" She shook her head, writing again. "Parents died. On my own since 20. "How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?" 23, he nodded. "Brave woman living out here alone." He paused, studying her. "Been mute your whole life," she wrote quickly, "since birth. Can hear some loud sounds, but mostly silence. And the sign language, who taught you?" "Mother learned from missionary school, taught me. Few others understand." Dawson leaned forward. "I'd like to learn more properly, I mean, if you're willing to teach me." Sadie tilted her head, questioning. "I'll be here a while," he explained. "The ranch I'm doing business with needs horses broken over the next month or so. Could come by in the evenings if that's proper." Sadie considered his offer. Knights Ferry was small enough that having a man visit regularly would start gossip, but she found herself nodding anyway. Something about Dawson Quinn felt trustworthy, despite his obvious comfort with a gun. She wrote, "People will talk." Dawson smiled. "Let them. Nothing improper about learning to communicate." "Besides," he added, his eyes twinkling, "might be useful having someone around who understands you with all this trouble brewing." And so began their lessons. Each evening after Dawson finished at the ranch, he would arrive at Sadie's cabin with something to share: fresh eggs one day, coffee beans the next, once even wildflowers he'd gathered from the hillside. Sadie taught him how her hands could speak, and he proved a quick study. Within 2 weeks, their conversations flowed more naturally. Dawson still needed the slate sometimes, but increasingly they communicated through a combination of sign language and expressions. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold, Dawson asked the question she'd been dreading. "What happened to your parents?" He signed. Sadie's hands stilled in her lap. She looked away, blinking back sudden tears. Finally, she raised her hands. "Fever took father first," she signed. "Mother lasted 3 more days. I nursed them both." "I'm sorry," Dawson replied, his movements gentle. "Your family?" she asked. "Mother in Oregon. Father died in mining accident when I was 14. He paused. Brother killed in the war." They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Ever lonely?" Dawson asked, his fingers hesitant. Sadie nodded slowly. "Always. Until recently," she added, not meeting his eyes. When she finally looked up, Dawson was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He started to reach for her hand but stopped himself. "It's getting late," he said, rising to his feet. "I should go before the sheriff comes to run me off your property." Sadie stood too, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. She touched his arm lightly. "Tomorrow," she signed. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised with a smile that stayed with her long after he'd gone. The next morning, Sadie worked in her leather shop, crafting a special gift for Dawson, a belt with intricate designs she'd been planning for days. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the 3 men approaching until they pounded on her door. When she opened it, she recognized Thomas Blackwell, the mining company's representative, flanked by 2 burly men she'd seen in town. "Miss Gibson," Blackwell said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to discuss our previous offer for your property." Sadie shook her head firmly and reached for her slate, writing quickly, "Not for sale. Please leave." Blackwell's smile tightened. I'm afraid you misunderstand. The offer was a courtesy. The company will have this land one way or another. He nodded to one of his men who stepped forward menacingly. We can make life very difficult for a woman alone. Fear coiled in Sadie's stomach, but she stood her ground, wishing desperately that she could scream for help. Her hand moved to the pocket of her apron where she kept a small knife for her leatherwork. Is there a problem here? Dawson's voice cut through the tension as he appeared around the side of the cabin, leading his horse. His right hand rested casually near his holster. Blackwell turned, obviously annoyed at the interruption. This doesn't concern you, stranger. When I see 3 men threatening a lady on her own property, it becomes my concern, Dawson replied, his voice deceptively pleasant. Especially when that lady is a friend of mine. Quinn, one of the men muttered to Blackwell, he's the one who shot Jenkins last week. Blackwell reassessed the situation, his eyes narrowing. We were just leaving, but this discussion isn't finished, Miss Gibson. He tipped his hat with mock politeness. Good day. As the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, Sadie's knees nearly buckled with relief. Dawson was at her side in an instant, steadying her. Thank you, she signed, her hands trembling. Those the men who have been bothering you about your land? When she nodded, his jaw tightened. Blackwell's got a reputation, he doesn't give up easy. What do I do? She asked. Dawson guided her inside and closed the door. First, we talk to the sheriff, then we figure out how to keep you safe. He hesitated. Sadie, have you considered selling? Not that I think you should, he added quickly, but if your safety's at risk. She shook her head emphatically. This is my home, my parents' home, I won't be frightened away. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but his eyes held admiration. All right then. Let's make sure Blackwell understands you're not alone anymore. Together they rode into town to speak with Sheriff Thornton. The lawman listened to their account, his expression grave. I can't arrest them for making an offer, even if it came with implied threats, he said finally. But I'll have a word with Blackwell about harassment. That won't stop him, Dawson argued. Men like that only understand force. And what exactly are you suggesting, Quinn? The sheriff asked sharply. Vigilante justice? I'm suggesting Miss Gibson needs protection. Blackwell's already responsible for burning down the Miller place when they refused to sell. You can't prove that. We all know it's true, Dawson insisted. He turned to Sadie. I'll stay at your place tonight, sleep in the barn. The sheriff raised his eyebrows. That wouldn't be proper, Quinn. Sadie's hands moved decisively. My choice, I accept, the sheriff sighed. I can't stop you, but folks will talk. Let them, Sadie signed, and Dawson translated with a hint of pride in his voice. As they rode back to her cabin, Sadie couldn't help feeling a mix of fear and something else, a strange exhilaration that Dawson would be nearby. She'd never had someone willing to stand up for her this way. That night, after preparing a place for Dawson in her small barn, Sadie returned to her cabin, more aware than ever of her isolation. The shadows seemed longer, the night sounds more ominous. She placed her oil lamp near the window, a signal they'd arranged if she needed him, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about Dawson just yards away, about the way he looked at her as if her silence was not a barrier but simply another way of being. About the danger that might come for both of them. Near midnight, a crash from her workshop jolted her upright. She grabbed her shawl and the lamp, her heart racing as she moved cautiously toward the sound. Before she reached the workshop door, the smell of smoke reached her. Fire. Panic seized her. She ran to the window and frantically waved the lamp, praying Dawson would see it. Then she grabbed a blanket, wet it at her washing basin, and wrapped it around herself before opening the workshop door. Flames had already consumed one wall where her leather supplies were stored. The fire was spreading quickly, feeding on the oils and materials. Sadie rushed to the water bucket, throwing its contents at the base of the flames, but it made little difference. Strong hands suddenly pulled her backward. Dawson. He pushed her toward the door, gesturing urgently, out, now. She protested, pointing to her work, her tools, everything she depended on. He shook his head firmly and physically guided her outside. Once in the yard, he ran to the well and began drawing water while Sadie filled a bucket from the rain barrel. Together they formed a line, passing water back and forth, fighting the blaze that threatened to consume everything she owned. Sweat streamed down their faces as they worked, the heat intense, the smoke choking. At some point, neighbors from nearby farms arrived to help, forming a longer water line. By dawn, the fire was out, but Sadie's workshop was destroyed, along with half her cabin. She stood staring at the blackened ruins, ash settling on her shoulders like snow. Her body felt numb, her mind unable to process the devastation. Dawson approached, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke. "Are you hurt?" He signed. She shook her head, then surprised herself by reaching for his hands. They were blistered from the fire, yet still gentle as they enclosed hers. "This was Blackwell," she signed. "Yes," Dawson agreed grimly. "But he failed. You're alive and we can rebuild. I'm not leaving you alone, Sadie, not now." His hands tightened around hers. "Not ever if you'll have me." She stared at him, uncertain if she understood correctly. "I know it's sudden," he continued, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. "Maybe it's too soon to speak of such things, but tonight made me realize," he stopped, struggling to find words. "Life's too short and uncertain for waiting." Sadie pulled her hands free so she could reply. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and stubborn and skilled with your hands. I know you face each day with courage despite the silence. I know I want to learn every sign, every expression, every way you communicate." He took a deep breath. "I know I'm falling in love with you." Tears filled Sadie's eyes, blurring her vision. She'd never expected to hear those words from anyone, had resigned herself to a solitary life. Now this man, this cowboy who had crashed into her quiet existence, stood before her offering a future she hadn't dared imagine. "What about your travels?" She signed. "Your work?" "I've been thinking about settling somewhere," he admitted. "Starting my own ranch raising horses. Could do that here as well as anywhere." He gestured to the surrounding hills. "Good land, good water." He smiled slightly. "Good company." Sadie looked at the ruins of her home, then back at Dawson's earnest face. In the soft light of dawn, despite the destruction around them, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. "We rebuild first," she signed decisively, "then we talk of forever." Dawson's smile widened. "Yes, madam," he agreed, and gently brushed a smudge of ash from her cheek. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Dawson moved his belongings to a tent beside Sadie's damaged cabin. The neighbors, impressed by his dedication, pitched in to help with rebuilding. Even Sheriff Thornton, after initial reservations, joined the effort when it became clear Dawson's intentions were honorable. They worked from dawn till dusk, clearing debris, salvaging what they could, constructing new walls. Sadie insisted on rebuilding her workshop first so she could resume her leather crafting and contribute financially. Through it all, Dawson continued his sign language lessons. Their conversations grew more complex, more intimate. In the evenings, exhausted from the day's labor, they would sit by the campfire and share their hopes, their fears, their dreams. Dawson told her about the nightmares he still had from his brief time fighting in the war, about his guilt over surviving when his brother hadn't. Sadie confessed her loneliness, her frustration at being misunderstood or pitied because of her muteness. Sometimes, she signed one night, "I dream I can speak. I wake up trying to make sounds." "Do you wish you could?" Dawson asked gently. She considered the question. "I used to, every day now. It's just part of who I am." "I like who you are," he said, and the simplicity of the statement brought tears to her eyes. One afternoon, as they were fitting a new door to her workshop, Sadie noticed riders approaching. She tensed, recognizing Blackwell among them, and tapped Dawson's shoulder to alert him. He straightened, hand moving instinctively to his holster, but kept his voice calm. "Stay behind me," he said, positioning himself between Sadie and the approaching men. Blackwell reined his horse to a stop a few yards away, surveying the reconstruction with obvious displeasure. Quite the project you've got here, Quinn. Putting down roots in Knights Ferry, thinking about it, Dawson replied evenly. What brings you out this way, Blackwell? More friendly business proposals, the mining representative laughed without humor. Just passing by, shame about the fire. Accidents happen so easily out here in the wilderness. Wasn't an accident, Dawson said coldly. Sheriff's investigating. Arson carries a heavy penalty. Good luck proving anything. Blackwell's gaze shifted to Sadie. Miss Gibson, my offer still stands. Property with fire damage isn't worth much, but the company remains generous. Before Dawson could respond, Sadie stepped forward. She signed rapidly, her movements sharp with anger. Dawson translated. She says your money's no good here. This land stays in her family. Family, Blackwell raised an eyebrow. I was under the impression Miss Gibson was alone in the world, unless. His eyes moved between them, understanding dawning. Well, moving fast, aren't we, Quinn? Our arrangements aren't your concern, Dawson said. What should concern you is that Miss Gibson now has someone watching her back, someone who knows exactly what kind of man you are. Blackwell's expression hardened. Careful, Quinn, you're new here, don't want to make enemies. Too late, Dawson replied pleasantly. Now, if you don't mind, we've got work to finish. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might escalate the confrontation, then he turned his horse. This isn't over, he called over his shoulder as he and his men rode away. When they were gone, Sadie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dawson turned to her, concern in his eyes. You all right? She nodded, then signed. Did you mean it? Mean what? He signed back. Family, me not alone. Dawson's expression softened. He took her hands gently. I meant every word. If you'll have me, Sadie Gibson, I'd like nothing better than to be your family. In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to her first kiss, given freely to the man who had learned to hear her silent words. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They turned to see Sheriff Thornton riding toward them, his expression grim. Quinn, he called as he dismounted. Got word Blackwell was headed this way, everything all right. He just left, Dawson replied, keeping an arm around Sadie's waist. Made some thinly veiled threats, implied he was behind the fire. Man's getting bolder, the sheriff muttered. He looked at Sadie. Miss Gibson, I've got some news you should hear. The mining company's been buying up claims with forged documents. Federal marshal's on his way to investigate. Sadie's hands moved quickly, and Dawson translated. She wants to know if they'll be arrested. If we can prove it, yes, Thornton said, but Blackwell's dangerous. More so now that he's cornered, I'd feel better if you weren't out here alone. She's not alone, Dawson said firmly. The sheriff eyed them, noting their closeness. I can see that. Still, maybe you should stay in town until this is resolved. After discussing options, they agreed Sadie would move temporarily to the boarding house in Knights Ferry while Dawson continued working on her cabin. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it would be safer. That evening, as Dawson helped Sadie pack her few remaining possessions, a somber mood settled between them. The prospect of separation, even temporary, weighed heavily after weeks of constant companionship. I don't want to go, Sadie signed, her movements betraying her frustration. It's just for a little while, Dawson assured her, until the marshal arrests Blackwell or I finish rebuilding so the place is secure. I hate running. This is my home. And it will be again, he promised. Our home if you want. She looked up at him, her expression softening. Our home. I like that. I was thinking, Dawson said, suddenly nervous. When you come back, maybe you could come back as Mrs. Quinn. Sadie's eyes widened. Her hands stilled for a moment, then slowly formed a response. Are you asking me to marry you? Dawson knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I am. I love you, Sadie Gibson. I love your strength, your determination, your heart. I love the way you speak without words, how you've taught me to listen with more than my ears. He smiled up at her. I'm not a rich man, don't have much besides my horses and my hands. But everything I have is yours if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Sadie's cheeks as she nodded emphatically, her hands breaking free to sign. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Dawson stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he felt. When they finally separated, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When this business with Blackwell is finished," he whispered, "we'll start our life together properly. I promise you that." The next morning, Dawson escorted Sadie to the boarding house in town, arranged for her room, and reluctantly prepared to leave her there. "Be careful," she signed as they stood on the porch. "Blackwell is desperate." "I'll be fine," he assured her. "Focus on your leatherwork. The mercantile owner told me he'd display some of your pieces if you're interested." She nodded, grateful for the distraction. "I love you," she signed. "I love you too," he replied, signing and speaking simultaneously. "I'll come check on you tomorrow." As he rode back to Sadie's property, Dawson couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something about Blackwell's visit had set him on edge. The man hadn't seemed worried enough about the federal marshal or the accusations against him. His instincts proved right when he crested the hill overlooking Sadie's land. 3 riders were circling the half-rebuilt cabin, pouring liquid from containers onto the new lumber. Kerosene. Rage burned through Dawson's veins. He drew his revolver and urged his horse forward, closing the distance rapidly. One of the men spotted him and shouted a warning. All 3 reached for their weapons. Dawson fired first, hitting one man in the shoulder. The other 2 scattered, returning fire as they sought cover. Bullets whistled past Dawson's head as he dismounted and took position behind a large oak. "Give it up, Quinn," one of them shouted. "Blackwell says this ends today." "Where is he?" Dawson called back. "Too cowardly to do his own dirty work." A bullet splintered the tree near his face in response. Dawson ducked, then leaned out to fire twice more. One shot found its mark. He heard a cry of pain, but the third man was better positioned. The standoff continued for several minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Dawson knew he was outnumbered and running low on ammunition. He needed to change tactics. Keeping low, he circled around the property, using the trees and underbrush for cover. He managed to flank one of the men, getting close enough to rush him. They grappled briefly before Dawson subdued him with a blow to the head. The remaining gunman, seeing his companion fall, broke cover and ran for his horse. Dawson fired his last bullet, missing, then gave chase on foot. The man mounted and galloped away, leaving his wounded companions behind. Breathing heavily, Dawson secured the 2 injured men with rope from the barn. One was unconscious, the other cursing through gritted teeth. "Blackwell put you up to this," Dawson demanded. "Go to hell," the man spat. "You first," Dawson replied coldly. "Arson and attempted murder will hang you. Unless you cooperate." Fear flickered in the man's eyes. "What do you want? Where's Blackwell?" The man hesitated, then muttered, "Town. Said he had other business to attend to." Dawson's blood ran cold. "What business?" "Didn't say, just that he'd handle the woman himself, Sadie." Dawson's heart pounded with fear. The entire attack had been a diversion to draw him away from town, away from her. He quickly tied the men to a tree, knowing he couldn't take them with him and couldn't risk letting them escape. Then he mounted his horse and galloped toward Knights Ferry, praying he wasn't too late. Meanwhile, at the boarding house, Sadie was working on a leather pouch when a knock came at her door. Assuming it was the landlady, Mrs. Peterson, she opened it without hesitation. Thomas Blackwell stood in the hallway, a pistol held discreetly at his side. "Good afternoon, Miss Gibson," he said smoothly. "May I come in? We have business to discuss." Sadie tried to slam the door, but Blackwell was faster. He forced his way inside, closing the door behind him. "No need for alarm," he said, though the gun in his hand contradicted his words. "I simply need you to sign some papers." He removed a document from his coat pocket. "A transfer of deed. Once signed, you'll be free to leave Knights Ferry with your cowboy. I'll even throw in travel money." Sadie backed away, shaking her head. She gestured to the door, clearly telling him to leave. "I'm afraid I must insist," Blackwell said, his voice hardening. "Sign the papers, or I'll be forced to use more persuasive methods." Sadie's eyes darted around the room, seeking a weapon or escape. The window was too small for her to climb through, and Blackwell stood between her and the door. Your Quinn won't save you this time, Blackwell continued. He's otherwise occupied at your property, might not even survive the day. Fear clutched at Sadie's heart. Dawson in danger. She glared at Blackwell, her hands forming angry signs he couldn't understand. Spare me your hand waving, he sneered. Just take the pen and sign. He thrust the document toward her, momentarily lowering his gun. Sadie seized the opportunity. She grabbed the ceramic water pitcher from her nightstand and hurled it at his head with all her strength. Blackwell ducked, but the pitcher caught his shoulder, shattering and distracting him long enough for Sadie to lunge for the door. He recovered quickly, grabbing her arm and yanking her backward. The gun came up, pressing painfully against her ribs. That was foolish, he hissed. I tried to be civil. Now you'll sign, or I'll put a bullet in you and forge your signature anyway. Trapped and terrified, Sadie knew she had to stall for time. She nodded slowly, indicating she would comply. Blackwell smiled triumphantly and guided her to the small desk by the window, keeping the gun trained on her as he spread out the document. Initial here and sign at the bottom, he instructed, handing her a pen. Sadie took it with trembling fingers. She leaned over the paper, pretending to read it carefully. Then, instead of signing, she suddenly stabbed the pen's sharp nib into Blackwell's hand. He roared with pain and fury, the gun discharging into the floor as his finger reflexively tightened on the trigger. Sadie used the moment to shove him backward with all her strength, knocking him off balance. She bolted for the door again, yanking it open. This time she made it into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor as she ran toward the stairs. Behind her, Blackwell recovered and gave chase. Stop her, he shouted. Thief, stop that woman. No one appeared to intercept her. The boarding house seemed deserted in the middle of the day, most residents at work or running errands. Sadie reached the stairs and descended rapidly, nearly falling in her haste. She reached the ground floor and ran for the front door, but Blackwell was right behind her. His hand caught her hair, yanking her backward with brutal force. She cried out silently in pain as he dragged her toward a side room. I've had enough of your defiance, he snarled, his face contorted with rage. One way or another, I'll have that land. He shoved her into what appeared to be a small office, following close behind and locking the door. Sadie backed away until she hit a desk, her eyes never leaving the gun that Blackwell once again aimed at her. No more games, he said coldly. Sign the papers or die right here. Sadie knew she was out of options. Even if she signed, Blackwell would likely kill her to eliminate witnesses. Her only hope was that someone had heard the gunshot upstairs and summoned help. A pounding at the front door of the boarding house made them both freeze. Sadie, Dawson's voice called. Sadie, are you in there? Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by terror for Dawson's safety. Blackwell moved to the office window, keeping the gun trained on her. Your cowboy's persistent, I'll give him that, he muttered. Doesn't matter, he can't help you now. He returned his attention to Sadie. Sign the papers quietly, then call him in here. Sadie shook her head defiantly. Blackwell's face darkened. You think I won't kill him too? I've already arranged accidents for half a dozen minors who wouldn't sell. 2 more won't matter. The pounding at the door grew more insistent. Then came the sound of breaking glass, Dawson forcing his way in through a window. Sadie. His voice was closer now, frantic. Blackwell moved quickly, grabbing Sadie and positioning her in front of him as a shield, the gun pressed to her temple. In here, Quinn, he called out. Come join the party. Footsteps approached the office door, the handle turned, found it locked. Blackwell, Dawson's voice was deadly calm now. Let her go. Not a chance. I've got business with Miss Gibson, business that's almost concluded. He pressed the gun harder against Sadie's head, making her wince. Isn't that right? Inside the room, Sadie stood perfectly still, her mind racing. She caught sight of their reflection in the window glass, saw how Blackwell held her where the gun was positioned. An idea formed. Open the door, Quinn, Blackwell called. Slowly, any sudden moves and the lady gets a bullet. If you hurt her, just open the damn door. Sadie heard the lock turn. The door began to open. She had one chance. As Dawson appeared in the doorway, she made her move. Drawing on all her strength, she slammed her elbow backward into Blackwell's stomach, simultaneously twisting away from the gun. Blackwell grunted in pain but kept his grip on the weapon. As Sadie dove to the side, Dawson lunged forward. The gun discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe inches from Dawson's head. The two men collided, grappling for control of the weapon. They crashed against the desk, knocking papers and a lamp to the floor. Sadie scrambled to safety, watching in horror as they fought. Blackwell was heavier, but Dawson was quicker. He managed to force Blackwell's gun hand upward, slamming it against the wall until the weapon fell from his grasp. But Blackwell responded by driving his fist into Dawson's side, finding the spot where he'd been wounded in the earlier firefight. Dawson gasped in pain but didn't relent. He delivered a powerful blow to Blackwell's jaw, following with another to his midsection that drove the air from the mining representative's lungs. Blackwell staggered backward, reaching blindly for support. His hand found a letter opener on the desk, which he brandished with desperate menace. "I'll kill you both," he wheezed, slashing the makeshift weapon through the air. Dawson circled warily, searching for an opening. Blackwell lunged, the letter opener slicing through Dawson's shirt and drawing blood. Dawson retreated a step, wincing behind Blackwell. Sadie spotted the fallen gun. She moved silently, reaching for it while Blackwell's attention remained fixed on Dawson. Her fingers closed around the cold metal just as Blackwell prepared for another attack. Rising, she stepped forward and pressed the gun against his back. Blackwell froze, feeling the pressure of the barrel. "It's over," Dawson said, seeing Sadie's determined expression. "Drop the letter opener." For a moment, Sadie thought Blackwell would comply. Then, with a roar of fury, he spun toward her, the letter opener raised to strike. The gun fired. Blackwell staggered, a look of shock crossing his face as he clutched his chest. He took one faltering step toward Sadie before collapsing to the floor. Dawson moved swiftly, kicking the letter opener away and checking Blackwell's pulse. He looked up at Sadie, who stood frozen, the gun still extended. "He's alive," Dawson said, gently taking the weapon from her trembling hands. "But badly wounded." The office door burst open again as Sheriff Thornton appeared, gun drawn. Behind him stood Mrs. Peterson and several other townsfolk, attracted by the commotion and gunshots. "Quinn, what in blazes?" the sheriff stopped, taking in the scene. "Blackwell, what happened here?" While Dawson explained, the sheriff sent for the doctor. Blackwell was carried to the jailhouse infirmary under guard. His condition serious but stable. Sadie, still shaken, allowed Mrs. Peterson to guide her back upstairs to wash and change her blood-spattered dress. Dawson refused to leave the boarding house despite his own injuries needing attention. When Sadie returned downstairs, the sheriff was finishing taking Dawson's statement. "The two men at your place have been picked up," Thornton was saying. "They're singing like canaries, trying to save their necks. Seems Blackwell's been operating quite the criminal enterprise on behalf of the mining company." "And the company?" Dawson asked. "The federal marshal arrived an hour ago. He's already seized their offices and records." Thornton shook his head. "Quite a mess. Forged deeds, intimidation, arson, even 3 murders they're connecting to Blackwell." Sadie approached, and Dawson immediately went to her side, his arm encircling her protectively. "Miss Gibson," the sheriff said, his voice gentle. "I'll need your statement when you're feeling up to it." She nodded, then looked at Dawson questioningly. "I'm all right," he assured her, though the makeshift bandage on his side told a different story. "Just a scratch." "You need a doctor," she signed firmly. "She's right," Thornton agreed when Dawson translated. "Doc can see you after he's done with Blackwell. In the meantime." He hesitated. "Miss Gibson, I know it's not proper, but given the circumstances, perhaps Quinn should stay here tonight for protection." Mrs. Peterson, hovering nearby, cleared her throat. "I've prepared the room next to Miss Gibson's," she said primly. "Under the circumstances," Dawson smiled gratefully. "Thank you, madam, just until things settle." When the sheriff departed, promising to return in the morning, Dawson and Sadie were finally alone in the boarding house parlor. The events of the day caught up with them all at once. Sadie began to tremble, delayed shock setting in. Dawson pulled her gently into his arms. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. We're safe." She clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady despite everything they'd endured. "I thought I'd lost you," she signed when she finally pulled back enough to use her hands. "Never," he promised. "Takes more than Blackwell and his thugs to keep me from you." "I shot him," she signed, her expression troubled. "I've never hurt anyone before." "You saved my life," Dawson corrected gently. "You did what you had to do, same as I would have done for you." Sadie nodded slowly, processing his words. Then another thought occurred to her. Our home, did they burn it? "No," Dawson assured her. "I got there in time, some kerosene on the new lumber but no real damage. We can still rebuild." Relief washed over her face. "When can we go back?" "Tomorrow, if the sheriff agrees it's safe." Dawson touched her face tenderly. "And then, if you still want to, we can talk to the preacher about that wedding." Sadie's eyes lit up. "I still want to," she signed emphatically. "Good." Dawson smiled, though pain flickered across his features as he shifted position. "You're hurt worse than you're admitting," she signed accusingly. "Maybe a bit," he conceded, "but I'll heal, as long as you're by my side." "Always," she promised. The next weeks passed in a flurry of activity. With Blackwell in custody awaiting trial and the mining company under investigation, Knights Ferry gradually returned to normal. Dawson and Sadie resumed work on her cabin, adding rooms and improvements to accommodate their future life together. Word of their engagement spread quickly through town. Most people were supportive, though some questioned how a marriage could work with Sadie's condition. Those doubts only strengthened Dawson's resolve to prove them wrong. He continued learning sign language, becoming more fluent each day. He discovered that communication between them ran deeper than mere words. They developed a connection that transcended conventional speech, a language of their own made up of signs, expressions, and touch. On a clear Sunday in September 1875, just as the first hints of autumn touched the California foothills, Sadie Gibson became Sadie Quinn in a simple ceremony behind their newly completed home. She wore a dress of pale blue silk ordered specially from San Francisco, with wildflowers in her hair. Dawson stood tall in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving hers as they exchanged vows, his spoken, hers signed, both equally binding. Sheriff Thornton gave the bride away. Mrs. Peterson wept openly. The entire town turned out to witness the union of the mute leatherworker and her cowboy, a love story that had captivated Knights Ferry through its unlikely beginning and dramatic evolution. At the reception, Dawson surprised everyone, especially Sadie, by delivering his toast entirely in sign language. His hands moved with newfound confidence as he expressed his love and commitment before speaking the words aloud for the guests. "To my wife, who taught me that the most profound communications often come without sound," he concluded. "I promise to always listen with my heart as well as my ears." Sadie's eyes shimmered with tears as she signed her response. "And I promise to fill our lives with love that needs no voice to be heard." They began their married life in the reconstructed cabin, which now featured a spacious workshop for Sadie's leathercraft business and a large stable where Dawson could pursue his dream of breeding horses. The land that Blackwell had coveted became the foundation for their shared future. By spring of the following year, Knights Ferry had largely forgotten the troubles brought by the mining company. Blackwell had been sentenced to prison for his crimes, the company dissolved, and the rightful owners restored to their properties. Life settled into pleasant routines. Sadie's leather goods gained reputation beyond the local area, with orders coming from as far as San Francisco. Dawson's horse breeding business flourished as well, his eye for quality stock earning respect throughout California. But their greatest joy came one April morning when Sadie placed Dawson's hand on her stomach, her eyes conveying what her hands then confirmed. They were expecting a child. "A baby," Dawson whispered, awe and delight spreading across his face. When she nodded, he lifted her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing, her silent but no less joyful. "Will you love the baby if it's like me?" Sadie asked later that night, a shadow of uncertainty crossing her face. Dawson's response was immediate and fierce. "I will love our child no matter what. But Sadie, understand this, if our baby is deaf or mute or both, it won't be a tragedy. It will simply be another Quinn who communicates in extraordinary ways." His acceptance, so complete and unquestioning, washed away fears Sadie hadn't even fully acknowledged. In that moment, she felt truly heard in a way that transcended physical sound. Their son, Samuel, was born that November, healthy, vocal, and blessed with his mother's expressive eyes and his father's determined spirit. From his earliest days, he learned 2 languages simultaneously, the spoken words of his father and the graceful signs of his mother. By his 2nd birthday, Samuel moved effortlessly between both worlds, speaking and signing with equal confidence. Visitors to the Quinn Ranch often marveled at the child's dual fluency and the harmonious communication within the family. "Never seen anything like it," Sheriff Thornton, now retired, commented after a visit. "That boy's going to bridge worlds someday." He wasn't wrong. As Samuel grew, so did his ability to connect those who signed and those who spoke. By age 10, he occasionally interpreted for his mother in town, though Dawson usually filled that role. By 15, he was formally teaching sign language to interested townsfolk, creating a community where Sadie was increasingly understood without translation. Through the years, the Quinn family expanded. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 3 years after Samuel, followed by twins Michael and James 2 years later. Each child grew up bilingual in speech and sign, carrying forward the legacy of understanding that had begun with a cowboy learning to hear a mute woman's silent words. Dawson and Sadie's love deepened with each passing season. The challenges they faced, drought years, economic hardships, the inevitable conflicts of married life, only strengthened their bond. They developed a remarkable ability to resolve differences through their unique communication, often finding that misunderstandings dissolved when expressed through both sign and speech. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dawson presented Sadie with a journal he had kept since their early days together. In it, he had recorded their journey, the first signs he learned, the moments of breakthrough, the gradual building of their shared language. "I wanted you to know," he told her as she leafed through the pages, "that I heard every word you never said." Sadie's eyes filled with tears. She set the journal aside and took his face in her hands, her expression conveying everything her voice never could. "You gave me a voice," she signed. "You heard me when no one else would listen." "No," Dawson corrected gently. "You always had a voice, Sadie. I just learned how to hear it." In that moment, surrounded by the home they had built together, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured through 2 decades of challenges and triumphs, they understood a truth that had guided them from the beginning. True communication transcends conventional speech. It resides in the willingness to listen beyond words, to see beyond limitations, to connect beyond differences. For Dawson and Sadie Quinn of Knights Ferry, this understanding had transformed a chance encounter during a gunfight into a lifetime of love expressed in silent words and heard by faithful hearts. As the sunset painted the Sierra foothills in gold, they stood on their porch hand in hand, watching their children tend to horses in the paddock, a scene that had seemed impossible to Sadie before Dawson entered her world. A family created from courage, sustained by understanding, bound by love that needed no sound to resonate through their lives. "I'm glad you learned to hear me," Sadie signed, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Best thing I ever did," Dawson replied, signing and speaking together as had become his habit. "And I'm still listening." Their hands intertwined hers that spoke volumes without sound, His that had learned to understand a testament to the profound truth that love finds its own language when hearts are open to hear.